Guys, I apologize. My voice is going in and out. Just caught a little junk here, so excuse me in today's video. With that being said, last week we covered the big sandbox patch that came out, update 7.3.5. We did pre and post testing on it as well if you have not checked that out. But in that pre and post testing video, we talked about a weapon that arguably got the biggest overhaul, and that is the exotic SMG Manticore. Not only did this weapon receive major increases to its ease of use, but guys, it was just outright buffed. And one of the buffs wasn't even mentioned in the patch notes, and it's a huge buff. But before we dive into the hidden stuff, let's talk about the patch notes that were disclosed to us. Bungie states you must now be airborne for 0.5 seconds and deal damage with the weapon to activate the perk. Now, this is to prevent accidental activation while running downstairs or doing small jumps. And now has a special reload to disengage anti-grav thrusters. And while anti-grav thrusters are engaged, combatants will be less accurate when targeting the player. And then its catalyst, final blows and sustained damage with this weapon while airborne grants a void overshield and returns ammo to the magazine. Guys, these are massive overhauls that I'm really surprised Bungie is doing here. Now, as a recap, the exotic perk on Manticore is Soaring Fang. Dealing damage while grounded charges anti-grav repulsors. Dealing damage while airborne extends anti-grav repulsors. You have an alternate weapon action to then disengage anti-grav repulsors. Now, everything here works off of a meter. You can see this when you have Manticore equipped, either with your buffs and debuffs or under your reticle when you hit fire. Simply dealing damage while you have your feet on the ground will then build up this meter, with extra progress being granted for kills. Now, at any amount of the meter, you could take to the air by being airborne for at least half a second and then deal damage with Manticore. Usually that just looks like building up a meter, then jumping and hitting a target, and then once anti-grav repulsor is active and you're floating around in the air, the rest of the exotics functionality will come into play. Now, if you want to stay in the air, you need to be dealing damage to combatants. But while you're dealing damage, your meter will decrease with each shot. And once it runs out, anti-grav repulsors will deactivate and you'll have to build it back up. Now, if you want to disengage, you can just drop out of the sky by holding your reload button or by simply swapping your weapons. Now, it's a bit of a balancing act. You got to manage your time on the ground to then optimize your time in the air. The question is, why would you want to be in the air? It's not like we got any cover in things like Grandmaster Nightfalls. This sounds like a nightmare. Put yourself in the air and get instantly shredded. But this is where the weapon's catalyst and most recent buffs come into the mix, which takes us to our stealth buff. You see, Manticore's second exotic perk is Swooping Talents, which reads, dealing damage while airborne increases this weapon's damage output. Now, before this patch, this was a ramping damage buff that capped out at 40% after dealing damage while airborne. Now though, this ramping damage increase will cap out at a massive 100% after roughly shooting 29 shots. We go from dealing 755 damage per body to Carl to now dealing 1,510 damage. It also seems that pacing your shots will increase this faster, as in if you're shooting in full auto, it takes quite a bit longer to reach that maximum damage. Now, what else happens while we're in the air? Next to the massive damage buff, thanks to this update, enemies are actually less accurate. For instance, Carl here usually will laser beam us with the minigun of his, but now he actually just aims in one spot and misses us before readjusting and trying again. It's really an interesting way to buff this weapon. I'm not quite sure what the range of this is, but everything in this immediate room seems to just outright miss us. Then lastly, the catalyst will further increase your potency while airborne thanks to the rework size buff. You see, it used to refill just a measly 3 rounds while dealing sustained damage and giving us 40% damage resist that would last for 5 seconds. Now the catalyst has been buffed to do all of that, but just better. It reads, while you are airborne, sustained damage and final blows with this weapon to difficult combatants grants a void overshield, reduce combatant accuracy, and return ammo to the magazine. Now, before we break it down, I do want to mention that this description is wrong in a couple ways. The reduced accuracy happens with or without the catalyst, and all of the above effects happen regardless of enemy type. So I'm really not sure what they mean by difficult combatants, especially considering that red bars also still count in that reduction in combatant accuracy. Now for the void overshield and ammo return. These happen simultaneously. Upon a kill or landing a certain amount of shots, Manticore will now refill 12 ammo to the mag and grants an overshield for 6 seconds. Now this overshield is what replaced the 40% damage resist, but there's also a reminder that void overshields grant 50% damage resist and it synergizes with Void 3.0. Now for activating the catalyst on sustained damage, I would say a certain amount of shots because let's be frank guys, it's inconsistent. If you tap fire, it only takes about 5 shots. If you full auto, it's around 14. So just know that you can have infinite ammo and infinite void overshields without ever having to reload, as long as you don't dump your entire mag. So what's the gameplay loop here? The new Manticore works as follows. You deal damage while on the ground to charge your meter. When you've got enough, you jump up into the air, which immediately makes targets less accurate, while also ramping your damage up to 200% of your base damage. And then while you're up there, you're refilling your ammo, you're giving yourself a void overshield on kills, as well as sustained damage as your meter drains. And then once you're out, or you've decided you want to get down, you could deactivate the anti-grav repulsors and start to build that meter again. Which takes us to what is the best thing here to pair with Manticore. There's actually a number of things. You've got exotics like Wings of Sacred Dawn, you've got Gyrfalcons, you've got Stompees. We're gonna go over each one of these, but I'm gonna start with Wings of Sacred Dawn. And surprisingly, the reason why I'm gonna start here is because Manticore easily gains the benefits from aspects like Heat Rises. Every kill while airborne will give you 25% melee energy. And if you pair this with Icarus Dash, you'll grant yourself Cure when you get multi-kills while airborne. A lot of people don't realize that Icarus Dash has that secondary benefit. They're like, oh, look at me, I'm a dashy boy. But this is really good because you're able to proc this very easily with Manticore, considering its entire playstyle is you getting kills from the air. Then if you combine this with Wings of Sacred Dawn, you're granting yourself 15% damage resist when aiming down sight and dealing damage. Again, this means with Manticore and Wings active, you're getting not only that 50% damage reduction with your overshield, but also the 15% damage reduction from Wings itself. But this also takes us to our next set of synergy. This is for my hunters. And before we get into Stompees, I want to talk Gyrfalcons. Manticore is a void weapon, which means it pairs perfectly with Gyrfalcons Hauberk. Gyrfalcons gives all of our void weapons volatile rounds when coming out of invisibility. And when we pair that with the Hunter Fragment Stylish Executioner, which gives us invisibility when killing void debuff targets, you get an infinite loop of invisibility, which means an infinite loop of volatile rounds. Now, you do need to start the loop, but you can easily do that with things like Vanishing Step and just get that invis from dodge. Or you can even use things like Trapper's Ambush to get invis from your smoke. Now, I know this works with pretty much any void weapon, but keep in mind, Manticore is an exotic, so you're already getting that bump in damage because it's an exotic, at least against red bars. But when you pair these two things together, you're not only increasing your lethality with Gyrfalcons and Manticore, but you're also giving yourself overshields and you're going invisible. And if you add on things like Echo of Starvation to get Devour for picking up orbs, or Echo of Persistence to make void overshields last 9 seconds, up from 6, you're then tripling down on that survivability. And the way you're kind of floating up in the air, going in and out of invis, you feel like a stealth bomber. Like we had our AC 130 build with Skyburner's Oath on Titan class. And yeah, you could pull that off with Warlocks. But this is all about stealth, coming in and out of invis, applying volatile, exploding everything, and then going invis right after. You got to think about this from like the perspective from our ads inside of PvE. First, they don't even see you. You go invis, you then reappear in front of them. Then when they try to shoot at you, they don't know where to shoot because they're confused because you're rocking Manticore and it messes with the accuracy of your enemies. And then the moment they can actually start to kind of dial in on where you may be, you go back invisible on them. Honestly, it's kind of terrifying. And lastly, we have Stompees. Probably an exotic my PvE players never thought I would recommend. But Bungie actually buffed these inside of PvE at the beginning of the season by decoupling it from our class ability and adding damage resist while airborne. Now, we touched on Wings of Sacred Dawn for Warlock, which adds a 15% damage reduction, culminating in a 57.5% total damage reduction. But here on Stompees, the damage reduction from this exotic is a whopping 30%. You pair that with the 50% from the Void Overshield, and you're getting 65% damage reduction while anti-grav repulsor is active. It's a weird thing to say, but hunters, you may want to consider Stompees for high level content. A near permanent 65% damage reduction is really nice. Now, personally, I brought the Gyrfalcon build inside of PvE and played a bunch of Grandmasters yesterday. The playstyle is fun. You're applying volatile everywhere, you're getting that overshield, you're pumping up that damage while airborne. But guys, I gotta be frank, I did notice some drawbacks. Number one, this is still an SMG, so it's not like you could sit back and shoot from afar. Number two, even though you do confuse the enemies when they're shooting at you while you're airborne, what you don't confuse is anything that tracks. So if it's like those void orbs or like thresher rockets, you can be airborne all day long and they will track right up to you. Secondly, if you're airborne and one of your teammates happens to jump behind behind you. The enemies are going to be shooting at your teammates, and considering this is a Grandmaster Nightfall, they're going to hit you and instantly shred you, even with that damage resist. So just a few things that I've run into when using Manticore. Is it a game-breaking, super meta, exotic SMG? No. But is this a substantial rework that makes this exotic much better than what it was before? Absolutely. When you tag on the overshield, the ability to almost infinitely return ammo to yourself, and the stealth increase in our damage that applies to Manticore while airborne, it's a buff worth talking about. And even though it may not be the best for things like GMs, for other things, especially for things like Coil, I think it'll serve you well. Now let's talk Manticore in PvP. Guys, I am in love with this SMG. Its entire playstyle just throws enemies off. Granted, it's much better in environments like 6v6 where things are very chaotic versus like a 3v3 environment. But I find like in these 6v6 game modes, there were moments that I was able to take to the air that would confuse the hell out of my enemies. Now in this new sandbox, considering we have new health pools, what are we looking at in terms of time to kill? Well, Manticore at base has a 0.73 time to kill value, which you can achieve in 11 crits, 1 body, at tier 10 resilience to tier 7. And then from tier 6 resilience all the way down, it can achieve that time to kill of 0.67 in 11 crits. Granted, it's a little difficult to do considering this is a 900 round per minute SMG. It's kind of a bullet hose. Now, Swooping Talons, the trait, takes about 30 hits to reach that maximum damage, which is 10% here inside of PvP. Now, granted, this doesn't really move the needle all that much. With Repulsor active, we have a time to kill value at 0.73, which you can achieve in 10 crits to body at tier 10 resilience. At tier 9, all the way to tier 6, you can get that time to kill of 0.67 seconds in 11 crits. And then from tier 6 all the way down, you can get that 0.67 time to kill value in 10 crits, 1 body. Now, the biggest constraints of this SMG are definitely the range. The range is just not good. I mean, we're looking at 46 range, which means you start to experience damage fall off at 18.6 meters. However, with that being said, in that 18.6 meter range, I felt that Manticore actually did pretty good. Granted, it's by no means meta, and there are obviously many other legendary SMGs that outclass it in terms of lethality. But guys, when you start to get in that groove, once you get Repulsor and start taking to the air, what happens is that even though they may look up and then start firing, it's a good chance you're already firing before them. So you already have a head start in many of these engagements. There were times too on maps like Citadel where I would kind of like hang around the side and the doors just waiting to get that angle. And yeah, I'm still rocking Gyrfalcons here, and it was doing pretty good. I know Gyrfalcons is more of a PvE thing, but the invis going in and out allowed me to push into a room, jump up in the air, plant myself, and then just start creating chaos, which is what you're able to do here with Manticore. Now, can you still do this with Blink Warlock? We've seen Frostbolt do it in the past. I think you can, but you're gonna need things like Astrosight. I mainly stayed on Hunter here. The reason why is because now you have to be in the air for 0.5 seconds, and it's a bit harder to do with Blink because it's such an immediate teleportation. Now, you guys can definitely give it a go. I just felt better with just a normal jump. Now, I will say something that really helps you here is while you're airborne, on kill, you're granting yourself 30 HP that lasts for 6 seconds. And on top of that, you're reloading yourself rounds. But considering that this is a bullet hose, be prepared to run out of ammo. And yeah, I don't really like Manticore's reload speed, which is why I was literally rocking triple loaders. So guys, that is our review here for the rework for the Manticore Exotic. I enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun using it, both in PvE and PvP. I like when I got to confuse enemies inside of PvE. It was a different play style, definitely a dangerous one, but I liked it. And when it worked wonderfully. However, when it did not work, you got shredded immediately. But the ability to just pause yourself mid-air, both in PvE and PvP, on top of the overshields, the damage buffs, the confusion to combatants inside of PvE, this is a playstyle that I think some of you, if you're getting bored with just like the normal run and gun, you may really like this. I found myself really liking it. Now, personally, I'm gonna go try it out in trials tomorrow and just see how things play out with it. I liked it in 6v6, but obviously in 3v3 modes, I feel like that's kind of a death sentence to suspend yourself in midair. It seems like a perfect opportunity for someone to just tee off on you with Dead Man's Tail or Igneous or any other weapon type. What I think is really good about Manticore though, is that if you play into that baiting playstyle, where you run around a corner after an enemy already sees you, and then you plant yourself midair, it throws them off whenever they come back around the corner and start to engage with you. And that's enough time to ensure victory. So guys, give it a go. Fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching, and as always,
slap that like button like your mama told you right.